A sharp November wind tore through O'Hare International Airport on the morning of November 12, 2025, scattering brittle leaves across the tarmac and tugging at the coats of travelers streaming through the terminal. Michael Jordan carved his way through the throng, a quiet colossus amid the chaos, executives shouting into earpieces, retirees hauling overstuffed suitcases, kids weaving through legs with restless energy. At 62, his hardwood heroics were a cherished legend, replaced by a deeper calling, skybound futures, a lifeline for Charlotte's poorest youth, fueled by his own hands and heart. He wore a charcoal jacket over a crisp white shirt, jeans worn at the knees, and a faded cap shadowing his weathered face. A leather satchel hung from his shoulder, packed with plans for a fundraiser set to unveil a new court tomorrow. His strides cut through the crowd, long and deliberate, a man who'd learned to move mountains without fanfare. At gate C-17, Flight 217 to Charlotte stood ready, a Boeing 737 gleaming under stark terminal lights, its silver skin streaked with the promise of dawn. Michael handed his first-class boarding pass to the gate agent, Kelly, a wiry woman with auburn hair yanked into a tight bun. She took it with a quick flick, her hazel eyes skimming his unpolished shoes and understated jacket before settling on the name. "Jordan?" she asked, her voice taut, a twitch at her lips suggesting the name didn't match her expectations. "That's me," he replied, deep and even, offering a faint nod. Kelly's fingers paused over the scanner, her shrug edged with frost. "Guess you're in. Hurry up," she said, thrusting the pass back with a chill that lingered. Michael caught the undertone, a whisper of judgment he'd faced since youth, but stepped onto the jetway, the tunnel's cold swallowing him whole. The first-class cabin glowed with quiet opulence, wide leather seats cradling a select few, overhead bins snapping shut with soft precision. Michael eased into 2A, window side, stowing his satchel with a fluid motion. The space pulsed with subtle power. A businessman in 3B hunched over a spreadsheet, tie askew. A woman in 1C, mid-50s, draped in pearls and cashmere, sipped a mimosa. An older man in 4A, silver hair swept back, paged through a golf magazine. Michael leaned into the seat, peering out at the tarmac where ground crews darted beneath a sky tinged with amber. He sought the calm, a fleeting pause before Charlotte's demands. But calm was a ghost on this flight. The air thickened as a flight attendant approached, his steps clipped and heavy, his lean frame taut with unspoken strain. His name tag read, Todd, pinned crookedly to a uniform that couldn't hide the fatigue in his shoulders. Late 30s, with a buzz cut and eyes shadowed by years of chasing a cockpit he'd never reach, he gripped a clipboard like a lifeline. "Boarding pass," he demanded, his voice a jagged edge, looming over Michael with the intensity of a man guarding a crumbling throne. Michael slid it from his pocket, handing it over without a flicker. Todd studied it, his brow furrowing into a scowl, then locked eyes with him, a spark of resentment flaring, less surprise than a wound reopened. "This says 2A, Todd said, tilting the pass as if it might confess a forgery. "But we're overbooked up here." He leaned closer, his breath sharp with mint, his words slicing through the cabin's hum. "Move to economy. They told me Michael Jordan needs to sit back there, said you don't qualify to be here." The declaration hit like a thunderclap, raw, deliberate, a veil of procedure hiding a deeper venom. The cabin snapped awake, heads tilting, breaths catching. Michael adjusted his cap, his voice a steady anchor. "I booked this seat, paid for it. They don't decide my worth." Todd's lips parted, a dry laugh escaping, his fingers drumming the clipboard with a nervous rhythm, a man whose failed pilot dreams now fueled a petty dominion. "Worth's not the issue. Space is. You're out," he said, his tone a mix of defiance and desperation, a gatekeeper clinging to control. The cabin stirred. Charles Wentworth in 3C, stocky and florid in his pinstripe suit, slammed his armrest, his drawl rolling out like a plantation echo. "Captain, let's not dawdle. This fella's gumming up the works," he said, his scorn a shield for a fading textile empire he'd inherited, not built. The older man in 4A, Harold, lowered his magazine, peering over bifocals with a sage's nod. "Order matters. Keeps things smooth. he murmured, his rasp hinting at a life spent enforcing boundaries. Michael stood, his 6'6" frame unfurling with deliberate grace, his shadow stretching across Todd's clipboard. "Order," he said, voice a low rumble, eyes drilling into the attendant's core. "Tell me what qualify means. Go on." Todd flinched, a muscle pulsing in his jaw, but he held firm, his resentment a fire stoked by years of watching others soar. "Don't play games," he snapped, stepping nearer, his clipboard trembling. "You're stalling. Captain's coming." He grabbed the intercom, his voice rising. "Sir, we've got a holdout in first. Won't comply." The cabin buzzed, whispers swelling into a clamor, Wentworth jeering, "Typical, pushing where he doesn't fit." Harold nodded faintly. "Always the same. Crowds shift." Michael's pulse surged, not fear, but a fire kindled by decades of proving doubters wrong. Amid the fray, his gaze caught on 1F, Evelyn Carter, late 60s, her tan scarf framing gray curls, scribbling in a notebook with a pen that danced like lightning. Her hazel eyes met his, sharp and unyielding, a subtle nod passing between them, a signal in the storm. She ducked her head, writing on, a mystery poised to unravel. Footsteps thundered from the cockpit, boots pounding carpet, authority inbound. Michael squared his shoulders, the satchel overhead a silent witness, braced for a fight he hadn't sought but wouldn't duck. Not here, not now. Todd's clipboard shook, Wentworth's bravado wavered, and Evelyn's pen paused, a scene teetering on the brink, with shadows yet to break. Flight 217 growled as it surged down the runway, the engine's roar a primal pulse beneath the simmering unrest in first class. Michael Jordan settled back into 2A, his cap shading eyes that tracked every flicker in the cabin, the damp smear on his tray a lingering taunt from Todd's earlier salvo. The overhead lights buzzed, casting a sterile glow across the leather seats where passengers adjusted their facades. Some feigned indifference, others sharpened their edges. The businessman in 3B stabbed at his keyboard, his tie a noose of stress. The woman in 1C swirled her flat mimosa, her pearls a fragile armor. Wentworth in 3C gripped his armrest, his bourbon breath a faint haze. Harold in 4A flipped his magazine with a practiced snap, his smirk a quiet verdict. Todd vanished to the galley, his clipboard slapping his thigh like a metronome of frustration, but his retreat only honed the tension. It didn't dull it. The captain, Hargrove, strode from the cockpit, his broad frame filling the aisle, his uniform pristine but his eyes shadowed by years of navigating more than weather. He halted at Michael's row, hands braced on his hips, his mustache twitching as he weighed the standoff. "We've got a packed bird," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl, "and a seating snag. You're shifting to coach, standard call."
Michael leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze a steady beam cutting through the haze. "Standard doesn't explain why I'm the pick, Captain. I've got 2A, paid cash, not favors." "Why me?" Hargrove's brow furrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Not malice, but the strain of a man tethered to orders he didn't fully grasp. "Overbooked means someone moves. You drew the short straw," he said, his fingers tapping his belt, a tick betraying a deeper reluctance.
Wentworth leaned across the aisle, his ruddy cheeks glowing with a mix of whiskey and entitlement. "Captain, let's not fuss," he said, his southern lilt a velvet lash, his words a plea to preserve a world where his name still carried weight. "He's slowing down folks who belong. Send him back." His scorn wasn't mere impatience. It was a fortress, built on a crumbling legacy he refused to let slip. Harold nodded, his silver hair catching the light. "Efficiency matters. Keeps the wheels turning," he said, his rasp a soft edict, a man who'd spent decades shaping order from chaos, now guarding it like a relic. Michael's pulse thrummed, a rhythm forged in clutch moments, down 3 with seconds ticking, but this was no scoreboard he could flip. "Belong?" he said, rising again, his frame a quiet sentinel. "I paid for this spot, same as you. Tell me why it's mine to give up." Hargrove shifted, his boots scuffing the carpet, caught in a bind he couldn't untangle. Todd re-emerged, his eyes glinting with a petty victory, his clipboard now a talisman. "Captain, he's gumming up takeoff. Security's ready," he said, his voice a tight coil. A man whose stalled ambitions fueled a need to dominate this sliver of sky. Before Hargrove could decide, a voice cut through, clear, unwavering, from 1F. "I'll go to coach," Evelyn Carter said, standing, her tan scarf slipping to reveal gray curls that framed a face etched with resolve. Her late-60s frame was slight, but her presence swelled, her hazel eyes piercing the fog. "No point in this mess. Let him stay." The cabin jolted. Wentworth's glass paused mid-sip. Todd's clipboard froze. Hargrove's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, that's not needed," the captain began, but Evelyn gathered her notebook with a deftness that silenced him. "It's practical. I don't mind. He's earned it." Wentworth barked a laugh, sharp and hollow. "You're tossing your seat for him? Waste of goodwill," he said, his disdain a shield against her defiance, a crack in his curated order. Harold peered over his bifocals, his tone measured. "Curious choice. Hope it pays off," he murmured, his words a bet against her instinct. A man who judged more than he'd lifted. Hargrove exhaled, a man dodging a bullet. "Fine, everyone sit. We're moving." Todd shot Michael a glare, resentment distilled into a single flash, then retreated, his pride dented but his intent unbowed. The plane climbed, piercing the slate-gray dawn, but the peace was a veneer. Todd returned with a drink cart, his movements crisp, serving Wentworth a whiskey with a nod. "Your usual, sir." Then Harold a coffee with a murmured, "Enjoy." He reached Michael, his hand hovering over a water bottle, then pulling back with a thin smile. "Stock's low, maybe next time," he said, his voice a barbed thread, his eyes daring a spark. Wentworth chuckled, swirling his drink. "Gotta wait your turn, rules of the game." Harold sipped his brew, adding, "Patience shapes a man, always has." Michael cracked his knuckles, a slow release, his calm a bulwark. "I've shaped mine through work, not handouts." "Keep your water," he said, his tone a steady drum, a warning wrapped in restraint. Todd's fingers twitched, his failed flight school test a ghost haunting this moment, Michael's presence a taunt to his clipped wings. The plane leveled off, the hum constant, but the cabin pulsed with a silent skirmish, and Evelyn's empty seat in 1F loomed like a beacon, her absence a thread yet to weave its tale. Flight 217 sliced through the morning sky, the cabin a tense truce at 30,000 feet, its leather seats cradling a standoff that simmered beneath the surface. Michael Jordan leaned into 2A, the window framing a vast expanse of gray clouds, his cap casting a shadow over eyes that missed nothing. The businessman in 3B pounded his laptop, lost in numbers. The woman in 1C fidgeted with her pearls, her mimosa untouched. Wentworth in 3C sipped his whiskey, his ruddy cheeks a map of strain. Harold in 4A folded his magazine, his silver hair a quiet crown, his gaze flickering with a judge's scrutiny. Todd paced the aisle, his uniform crisp but his posture frayed, a man burdened by more than trays, a failed pilot's test, a life stalled at cruising altitude. He paused at Michael's row, his hand brushing the cart with a deliberate clatter. "No water yet. Supplies are stretched," he said, his tone a honed edge, his eyes probing for a crack. Wentworth tilted his glass, ice rattling. "Rough luck, guess you'll adapt," he said, his drawl a soft lash, his amusement a shield for a legacy teetering on borrowed time. Harold adjusted his bifocals, peering over. "Endurance builds grit, time-tested truth," he offered, his rasp a gentle admonition. A man who'd shaped lives by enforcing patience. Michael met Todd's stare, his fingers tracing the armrest, his voice a steady pulse. Grit's earned through action, not waiting. "I'll manage," he said, his calm a fortress, a rebuttal carved from decades of proving worth. Todd's jaw tightened, a flash of something raw crossing his face, not just bias but a wound reopened. A man who'd once chased the cockpit Michael now commanded by presence alone. He wheeled the cart off, his retreat a silent growl, leaving the air charged. The plane jolted, turbulence shaking the frame, a chime signaling belts. Todd barked orders, "Buckle up now!" but lingered at Michael's seat, his clipboard a prop. "Don't push me up here. This is my domain," he said, his voice a tight whisper, his dream of wings twisted into a petty kingdom. Michael fastened his belt, unflinched. Your domain doesn't bend justice. Step up or step off. The jab landed. Todd's eyes flared, his pride a fraying tether, and he stormed away, a man unraveling mid-flight. The shaking eased, and Michael seized the moment. He unclipped his belt, slipping past Todd's watchful eye with a murmured restroom, and moved through the curtain to coach. The air shifted, thicker, alive with the rustle of families, the crinkle of snack bags, a toddler's soft whimper. He scanned the rows, spotting Evelyn Carter in 22C, her scarf loose, her paperback open to a worn page. She looked up, hazel eyes sharp behind faint lines, and closed the book with a decisive snap. Didn't expect you back here, she said, her Chicago lilt warm but edged with steel. You stepped in for me, Michael replied, crouching beside her, his frame a quiet giant in the narrow aisle. Why? Evelyn's lips curved, a teacher's knowing smile. Evelyn Carter, taught history at Laney High, 79 to 85. Watched you play, raw, unstoppable. Couldn't let them dim that fire up there. Michael's memory flared. Laney, his crucible, where coaches saw a spark in a lanky kid. You're a long way from chalkboards, he said, probing gently. She leaned in, voice dropping to a conspirator's hush. Not so far. I've studied people longer than books. Todd's not just bitter, he's haunted. A wannabe pilot who crashed out. Wentworth's a gatekeeper. Old money, old fears. They're rattled by what you stand for. Her insight pierced, a historian reading the now. She reached into her bag, pulling a folded note. This slipped from Todd's pocket in the galley. Take it.
Michael unfolded it. VIP says keep him low. Rough if needed. The scrawl was rushed, unsigned, a dagger in shadow. He pocketed it, mind racing. Who's pulling strings? Evelyn shrugged, her scarf slipping further. Couldn't catch a name, heard Todd muttering to the co-pilot about directives. They're circling you. Michael's fists balled, not rage but resolve, a playbook forming. They're betting on the wrong guy, he said, a faint grin breaking through. Evelyn handed him a small recorder, its red light pulsing. Snagged this. Todd and Wentworth scheming. Play it right. Her grip lingered, a mentor's trust. Back in first class, the note and recorder burned in his jacket, twin sparks waiting to flare. Todd resumed his rounds, his eyes darting to Michael with a hawk's focus, his control fraying as the flight wore on. Wentworth muttered to Harold, He's got gall, won't hold. Harold nodded, a sage's approval. Gall bends, always does.
Michael sat still, Evelyn's voice echoing. They're rattled by you, and the plane soared, a battlefield aloft, its next chapter unwritten. Flight 217 banked gently, Charlotte's lights winking through the thinning clouds, the cabin lights dimming as descent loomed. Michael Jordan sat in 2A, Evelyn's recorder a quiet heartbeat in his pocket, its captured voices ablade against the hostility encircling him. The businessman in 3B closed his laptop with a soft thud, stretching. The woman in 1C dabbed her lips with a napkin, her pearls dull in the fading glow. Wentworth in 3C swirled his third whiskey, his bravado a veneer cracking. Harold in 4A folded his arms, his bifocals glinting with a quiet ruling. The air pulsed, engines steady, tension mounting, a storm ready to shatter. Todd approached, his uniform creased, his buzz cut damp with the sweat of a fight he couldn't win. He stopped at Michael's row, clipboard dangling, his voice a strained filament. Landing's close. Hope you're set to exit quiet, he said, his eyes flickering with a blend of defiance and dread. A man whose grip on this sky was slipping. Michael adjusted his cap, meeting the stare with a steady flame. I'll exit when I'm ready, not your whistle to blow. The reply was calm, a rock against Todd's faltering tide, and it struck deep. Todd's hand tightened on the clipboard, his past, a flight school washout, fueling a resentment he couldn't quench. Wentworth leaned over, his bourbon sloshing, his drawl a lazy prod. Lighten up, pal. Don't stretch this out. You've had your run. His words were less a taunt than a plea. A man clinging to a fading empire where his name once parted seas. Harold chimed in, his rasp a measured slice. Respect the flow. It's kept us steady. His tone carried the weight of a life spent upholding boundaries, a retired arbiter who saw Michael as a ripple to smooth. Michael rose, his frame filling the aisle, his voice a low thunder. Respect. I've earned mine, paid for this seat, built a life. You don't redraw that line. The cabin hushed. Wentworth's glass froze. Harold's bifocals slipped. The woman in 1C gripped her armrest. Todd stepped closer, his clipboard a flimsy barricade. "You're crossing me. Captain's word holds," he said, but his voice wavered. A man unraveling under his own bluff. Michael held firm. "Word doesn't trump fairness. Show me the rule that picks me." The deadlock trembled, then Evelyn broke it. She emerged from coach, scarf trailing, her slight figure a quiet gale. "Captain," she called, her Chicago lilt cutting through the haze. "You've got a crew problem, caught on tape." She raised the recorder, its playback crackling, Todd's voice. "VIP says keep him down, rough if needed." Then Wentworth's, "Show him his rung." Gasps rippled. Businessman in 3B gaped. Harold's magazine slid to the floor. Todd lunged. "That's mine." But Michael intercepted, his arm a wall. "Not now. Truth's loose." The co-pilot, Daniels, burst from the cockpit, wiry and stern, his badge catching the light. "What's this?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. Evelyn stood tall, her notebook tucked away. "Your man's singling him out. Bias, plain and loud. Hear it." Daniels took the recorder, replaying it, his jaw clenching as Todd's words echoed. Wentworth shrank, his bourbon spilling. "I didn't mean jesting." Todd stammered, "Orders, not me." But Daniels's face darkened, a man who'd flown through enough storms to spot a squall. Coach erupted, passengers leaning forward. "That's MJ. Back off." "Disgraceful." Daniels turned to Todd. "Step back, rear of the plane, now." To Michael, "Sir, this isn't our standard. I'll log it." Michael nodded, voice even. "Log it right. For all, not just me." The plane dipped, wheels whining as it descended, and the cabin shifted. Wentworth stared at his lap. Harold's hands shook. The woman in 1C whispered a faint sorry. Cheers swelled from coach, a tide breaking through the curtain, and Michael sat, the recorder a quiet triumph in his grasp. At the gate, security boarded, faces grim. Todd protested, "I followed directives." But Daniels cut in, "Whose?" Silence answered. Michael stepped off, Evelyn beside him, her scarf a banner of resolve. "You turned the tide," she said, her smile a teacher's pride. He clasped her hand. "We did. Sky's not theirs yet." Charlotte Douglas Airport shimmered under a crisp November night as Flight 217 emptied, the terminal alive with murmurs and flashing screens. Michael Jordan stepped from the jetway, Evelyn Carter at his side, her tan scarf fluttering like a flag of quiet defiance. Security escorted Todd and Wentworth away, Todd's head low, his clipboard a relic. Wentworth's suit crumpled, his bravado a ghost. Daniels, the co-pilot, trailed behind, his voice hushed. "Mr. Jordan, Todd's off the roster, full probes underway. I'm sorry it came to this." Michael nodded, his gaze firm. "Make it count. Don't just shelve it." News spread like wildfire. By sunrise, headlines roared, "Jordan faces bias on flight, forces change." Clips from coach passengers, grainy, fervent, flooded online. Retirees who'd cheered his 93 finals run sharing them with trembling hands. Kids from skybound futures posting, "MJ's our rock, forever." The fundraiser swelled. Charlotte's old guard, gray-haired and resolute, tripled their gifts. Parents brought children to clasp his hand, their faith a salve after the storm. Evelyn stood with him at the event, her voice clear. He didn't just stand for himself, he stood for us all. That's the Michael I saw at Laney. The airline acted swiftly. Todd was axed within days, his file a trail of dodged warnings, his charm no longer a shield. Wentworth, Charles. Wentworth III, a textile scion with a fraying fortune, issued a hollow apology, then faded from sight, his VIP a shadow, perhaps a corporate ally, perhaps a myth. Hargrove faced review, his log noting incident, but no fault owned. He kept his wings, but the mark lingered. The carrier launched training, public, rigorous, pledging equity. Michael's name a silent echo in their vow. A week later, Skybound's new court opened under floodlights. Charlotte gathered, hundreds deep from retirees in Bulls caps to kids in fresh kicks, the asphalt a canvas of hope. The mayor, wiry and resonant, handed Michael a plaque, for courage beyond the court. The crowd surged, old fans clapping till their hands ached, parents lifting kids to see, Evelyn glowing in her scarf. Michael took the mic, his deep voice rolling over them. I've faced tough plays, on hardwood, in air, but this wasn't mine alone. It's yours, hers, ours. Build what lasts, fight what's wrong, every step. Applause thundered, a woman in a bull's scarf wiping tears. Jamal from Skybound sinking a jumper in salute. Under the hoop, Evelyn approached, her notebook stowed. You turned a flight into a legacy, she said, her hazel eyes bright. Michael handed her the plaque, a rare grin breaking free. You sparked it, Evelyn. Laney's still leading. She laughed, light and clear, and they stood together, watching kids dart across the court. Jamal, Sarah, a dozen more, their joy a thread weaving past to future. Driving home under a Carolina moon, Michael's pickup rumbled along silent roads, the night thick with stars. He thought of Todd's broken dreams, Wentworth's fallen throne, Evelyn's steady flame, fragments of a fight that transcended one flight. Keep climbing, he murmured, a pledge to the kids, to her, to a legacy forged not in trophies, but in tenacity. Skybound futures stood tall, a beacon unbowed, proof that heroes don't dim, they rise, lifting all in their wake.